Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Simic Investigator, Lonis Cryptozoologist. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what commanders you can vote for in the comments for an upcoming episode. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Lonis Cryptozoologist is a 1/2 Snake Elf Scout that costs a green and a blue with the following effects. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, investigate. We can also tap Lonis and sacrifice X clues to have target opponent reveal the top X cards of their library, allowing us to select a non-land permanent from among them with a mana value of X or less to put into play under our control, and have our opponent put the rest at the bottom of their library in a random order. So looking at our commander, we can see that he's packing a very low CMC and stat line, as well as a pair of abilities that are focused on generating clue tokens and weaponizing said clue tokens. Lunis' static ability makes him a potent clue generator, taking advantage of not only when we cast our creature spells, but also when any creatures enter the battlefield under our control, allowing him to take advantage of flicker effects to trigger his ability over and over again for more and more clue generation. Then, his second ability allows us to use those clue tokens for something other than card draw, since being in the Simic color combination we're kind of spoiled in that department. Being able to steal a non-land permanent from our opponent's deck to use as our own is a potent effect, and the fact that it still sacrifices the clues lets us take advantage of clue payoffs that care about such an effect. But while this will not be costing us any mana, it will usually be costing us a whole lot of clues, usually within the department of 6+, to be able to dig deep into our opponent's decks and find a decent card while still running the risk of whiffing or grabbing something small or situational. Despite that, however, it does provide our clues with extra utility, which is always a great option to have. So, Lunis is aggressively costed, is a good clue generator alongside our creatures, and provides extra utility for said clues. But how do we go about taking advantage of that? Normally, I would suggest a few different paths to build him here, and while I have seen a few fringe builds such as pod or cantrips, the overwhelming number of decks are clue-focused decks that use and abuse flicker effects and self-bounce to gain clues and then use those clues to win, which is the build we're going to be going with today. To facilitate this strategy, we'll be running a whole lot of creatures in this build, ranging from your standard mana dorks for early game ramp, creatures with ETB effects that either give us more ramp or disrupt our opponents, and plenty of creatures that can either bounce themselves or others, not only doubling up our commander's clue generation, but also any ETB triggers said creatures may have. Working alongside our creatures, we'll also be running plenty of other self-flicker and bounce effects in our non-creature spell slots, serving as both a means to generate more clues with our commander, reuse ETB effects on our creatures, and protect our creatures from targeted removal. And with all that flickering and self-bounce, we'll have plenty of clues to be used by our commander or other creatures or spells that care about clues or artifacts, either by getting us extra value as we crack them, pumping themselves or others based on their number, or by turning the clues themselves into creatures to overrun our opponents. So let's load up on Lunis Snacks, jump into the old mystery machine, and see who can do it better, a bunch of meddling kids or us. So now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start taking a look at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Starting in the CMC 1 slot, we have a trio of mana dorks with Elvish Mystic, Findhorn Elves, and Llanowar Elves, all being 1/1s that tap for a green for some staple creature-based ramp. The latter half of the slot then gives us some self-bounce with Fairy Imposter, Shrieking Drake, and Trusted Advisor. Fairy Imposter is a 2/1 flyer that sacks itself when it ETBs unless we bounce another one of our creatures back to hand, making it a cheap form of self-bounce on an offensively statted evasive body. Shrieking Drake is a 1/1 flyer that has us bounce one of our creatures back to hand when it ETBs, including itself, for a cheap form of multiple clue generation by bouncing itself over and over again. Trusted Advisor is a 1/2 that increases our maximum hand size by 2 and bounces one of our blue creatures back to hand at the beginning of our upkeep, at worst bouncing itself and bringing our hand size limit to 9 to take advantage of our clues card draw. Moving on to the CMC 2 slot, we'll start off with some green creatures in the form of Elvish Visionary, Wall of Blossoms, and Sakura Tribe Elder. Elvish Visionary and Wall of Blossoms both draw us a card when they ETB, the former being a 1/1 and the latter being a 0/4 defender, making them prime targets for flicker effects to gain us more card advantage. Sakura Tribe Elder is a 1/1 that we can sack to put a basic land from our deck into play tapped, providing us with some more staple green ramp on a body. Then we close out this slot with Dreamstalker, Coiling Oracle, and Erdwall Illuminator. Dreamstalker is a 1/5 that bounces a permanent we control back to hand when it ETBs, giving us some more self-bounce on a big defensive stat line to help ward off attacks as we investigate. Coiling Oracle is a 1/1 that has us reveal the top card of our deck when it ETBs, allowing us to put it into play if it's a land or into our hand if it's not, providing us with some more rampant card draw to benefit from our flickering and self-bouncing effects. Erdwald Illuminator is a 1/3 flyer that has us investigate an additional time when we investigate for the first time each turn, doubling up on the first clue token produced each turn and benefiting us when we use flickering effects on our opponent's turns alongside our commander. The CMC 3 slot then starts us off with a pair of ramp creatures, those being Farhaven Elf and Wood Elves, both being 1/1s that search our deck for a land when they ETB, the former for a basic and putting it into play tapped, and the latter for a forest and putting it into play untapped, giving us some more staple green land ramp on flickerable bodies. Some more ETB effects are up next with Manglehorn, Reclamation Sage, and Eternal Witness. Manglehorn is a 2/2 that destroys an artifact when it ETBs and causes all our opponent's artifacts to come into play tapped, giving us some ETB artifact destruction and a way to slow down our opponent's rocks or other tap-based artifacts. Reclamation Sage is a 2/1 that destroys an artifact or enchantment when it ETBs, again giving us some more back row removal that we can easily recur. Eternal Witness is a 2/1 that returns a card from our grave to our hand when it ETBs, providing us with the means to recur any spell or land from our bin if we need to use it again. Finally, we end this slot with a pair of cards that care about clues with Graph Mole and Academy Manufactor. Graph Mole is a 2/4 that gains us 3 life whenever we sack a clue, giving us even more value from our clues as we crack them for cards or other effects. Academy Manufactor is a 1/3 that, whenever we create a clue, food, or treasure, has us create one of each instead, tacking on ramp and life gain to our clue generation for an incredible value so long as it sticks around. The CMC 4 slot is up next, starting us off with some flash creatures with Mystic Snake, Frilled Mystic, and Venser Shaper Savant. Mystic Snake and Frilled Mystic both have flash and counter a spell when they ETB, the former being a 2/2 and the latter being a 3/2 with a more restrictive mana cost, both providing us with some excellent recurable control to disrupt our opponent's plays. Venser is another 2/2 flash creature, this time returning target spell or permanent to its owner's hand when it ETBs, not only allowing us to bounce our own creatures back to hand, but also our opponent's permanents or even spells on the stack to prevent them from resolving and forcing them to be played again. Next up are some creatures that care about clues with Briarbridge Patrol, Filigree Attendant, and Arcbound Crusher. Briarbridge Patrol is a 3/3 that investigates whenever it deals combat damage to a creature and lets us put a creature into play from our hand for free on each end step if we sacked 3 or more clues that turn, giving us both a clue generator and the means to cheat creatures into play as we crack those clues even on our opponent's turns. Filigree Attendant is a star 3 flyer whose power is equal to the amount of artifacts we control, making it an evasive body that can possess a huge power thanks to our clue generation. Arcbound Crusher is a 0/0 with Trample and Modular 1 that gets a +1/+1 counter whenever another artifact comes into play, giving us yet another creature that gets massive over time as we generate our clues and can even pass those counters on to another artifact creature when it dies. Some ETB creatures join us next with Amphin Mutineer, Timeless Witness, and Solemn Simulacrum. Amphin Mutineer is a 3/3 that exiles up to 1 non-salamander creature when it ETBs, giving its controller a 4/3 salamander token to replace it. Additionally, it has Encore for 4 and double blue, giving us some single target removal early and exiling up to 3 creatures later when we Encore it from the bin. Timeless Witness is a 2/1 that allows us to return a card from our graveyard to our hand when it ETBs, in addition to having Eternalize for 5 and double green, providing us with another Eternal Witness-like effect that we can proc from the grave in the late game with an even bigger stat line. Solemn Simulacrum is a 2/2 that puts a basic land into play tapped from our deck when it ETBs, and draws us a card when it dies, generating us some decent value both on ETB and death. Finally, we close out this slot with Temur Sabertooth and Beast Whisperer. Temur Sabertooth is a 4/3 that we can pay 1 and a green to bounce another creature back to hand and grant itself indestructible until end of turn, making it a resilient creature that can get our ETB creatures back into hand on the cheap. Beast Whisperer is a 2/3 that draws us a card whenever we cast a creature spell, giving us some staple green card draw to take advantage of our large creature base and self-bounce effects. The CMC 5 slot is up next with a trio of ETB effects with Wave Sifter, Mole Drifter, and Acidic Slime. Wave Sifter is a 3/2 flyer with Evoke for green and a blue that investigates twice when it ETBs, letting us play it early for the clues if we don't need the body, and later serving as a target for flicker and bounce effects for even more clue generation. Mole Drifter is a 2/2 flyer with Evoke for 2 and a blue that draws us 2 cards when it ETBs, again getting us some early card draw if we don't need the body and making a good flicker target when we get it to stick on the field later. Acidic Slime is a 2/2 Death Toucher that destroys target artifact, enchantment, or land when it ETBs, giving us some decent back row and land destruction on a defensive body to reuse with our flicker effects. The CMC 6 slot is up next with its single member, Shimmer Dragon, a 5/6 flyer that gains hexproof if we control 4 or more artifacts, and allows us to tap 2 artifacts to draw a card, granting us a big evasive and usually untargetable flyer that turns all our clues into card draw for some superb utility. Finally reaching the CMC 7 slot, we have our last 2 creatures with Thought Monitor and a Junk Winder. Thought Monitor is a 2/2 flyer with affinity for artifacts that draws 2 cards when it ETBs, giving us a more decent draw on a body we can cast on the cheap thanks to the amount of tokens we generate. Junk Winder is a 5/6 with affinity for tokens that taps down a creature whenever a token ETBs under our control, preventing it from untapping during its controller's next untap step, again giving us another well-statted body that we can cast on the cheap thanks to our clues, as well as a means to lock down our opponent's creatures as we create more clues. That wraps up our creatures, so let's move on to our instance. The CMC 1 slot starts us off with only a single entrant, that being Confront the Unknown, which investigates, then gives target creature +1/+1 for each clue we control, providing us with a combat trick that can pump up a creature significantly when we have a few clues lying around. Moving on to the CMC 2 slot, we have 3 entrants with Depart the Realm, Teferi's Time Twist, and Counterspell. Depart the Realm bounces an online permanent back to hand and can be foretold for a blue, giving us a bounce spell that can be used offensively, and that we can foretell early in case we can't play our commander. Teferi's Time Twist exiles a permanent we control until the beginning of the next end step and puts a +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, making it a good means to dodge targeted removal and even board wipes while making its target even stronger as a bonus. Counterspell simply counters target spell, giving us some staple no-nonsense disruption to disrupt our opponent's plays. Another trio of spells join us in the CMC 3 slot with Beast Within, Displace, and Ghostly Flicker. Beast Within destroys a permanent and gives its controller a 3/3 token, making it a very flexible removal spell to deal with a variety of threats with minimal downside. Displace and Ghostly Flicker both exile 2 of our cards, then return them to the field, the former being limited to creatures and the latter being able to target artifacts and lands as well, both giving us extra ETB triggers and a way to deal with targeted removal. Finally, we reach the CMC 4 slot and our last 2 instants with Illusionist's Stratagem and Rampage of the Clans. Illusionist's Stratagem exiles 2 of our creatures and returns them to play, as well as drawing us a card, making it a more expensive copy of Displace that also cantrips us as a bonus. Rampage of the Clans destroys all artifacts and enchantments, giving its controller a 3/3 token for each one destroyed this way, serving the dual purpose of an instant speed back row board wipe and the means to turn all our clues into an army of 3/3s at instant speed to overwhelm our opponents as a potent finisher. That covers all our instants, so let's move on to our sorceries. Skipping to the CMC 2 slot, we have a trio of entrants with Rampant Growth, Rise and Shine, and Curse of Swine. Rampant Growth simply puts a basic land from our deck into play tapped for some more staple green land ramp. Rise and Shine turns a non-creature artifact into a 0/0 with 4 +1/+1 counters and can be overloaded for 4 and double blue, giving us a spell that will always be overloading to turn all our clues into an army of 4/4s to serve as a win con for us. Curse of Swine is an X spell that allows us to exile X creatures, giving its controller a 2/2 token to replace it, making it a selective exile-based board wipe to deal with the most threatening creatures on the table while leaving our board intact. Moving into the CMC 3 slot, we have its 3 members with Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, and Root Out. Cultivate and Kodama's Reach both search our deck for 2 basics, putting one into play tapped and the other one into our hand for some more staple green land ramp. Root Out destroys an artifact or enchantment and investigates, making it a passable back row removal spell that gets us some more clues to further our game plan. Skipping to the CMC 5 slot, we have our last sorcery with Reverse Engineer, which draws us 3 cards and has Improvise, usually only costing us double blue to cast if we have at least 3 other clues in play for a potent draw spell. That wraps up our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. Skipping to the CMC 2 slot, we have Ongoing Investigation, which has us investigate whenever 1 or more of our creatures deals combat damage to a player. Additionally, we can pay 1 a green and exile 1 of our creatures from our graveyard to investigate and gain 2 life, providing us with more means to create clues from both attacking and exiling creatures from our graveyard, both conditions which we can achieve easily. Moving into the CMC 3 slot, we have its 3 members with Fey Offering, Ovenwald Mysteries, and Weirding Wood. Fey Offering creates a clue, food, and treasure token on our end step if we cast both a creature and non-creature spell that turn, a condition we can easily fulfill with this build for even more clues alongside ramp and life gain. Ovenwald Mysteries investigates every time one of our non-token creatures dies and creates a 1/1 whenever we sack a clue, being a decent clue generator as we lose our creatures and a means to replenish our board state by cracking said clues. Weirding Wood is an aura that enchants a land, investigating when it ETBs and allowing the land to tap for 2 mana of any one color, giving us a more ramp with a clue token as a minor bonus. Finally, the CMC4 slot gives us our last enchantment with the Antiquities War, a saga whose first and second chapter allow us to look at the top 5 cards of our deck, revealing an artifact from among them to put into our hand and sending the rest to the bottom of the deck in a random order, while its final chapter turns all our artifacts into 5/5 creatures until the end of the turn, giving us some potential draw on its first 2 chapters and a powerful, albeit slow, finisher on its final one by weaponizing all our clues. That covers all our enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. Skipping to the CMC2 slot, we have Idol of Oblivion, which we can tap to draw a card so long as we created a token that turn, and we can pay 8, tap it and sack it to create a 10/10, making it a good source of continual card draw for us, as well as a big creature in the late game should we ever need it. 3 more artifacts join us in the CMC3 slot, with Crystal Shard, Inspiring Statuary, and Nettle Cyst. Crystal Shard lets us pay either 3 or a blue and tap it to bounce a creature back to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1, making it the perfect tool to bounce our own creatures back on the cheap and occasionally catching a tapped out opponent's creature by surprise. Inspiring Statuary gives all our non-artifact spells improvise, effectively turning all our clues into mana rocks for a huge amount of ramp for us. Nettle Cyst is an equipment with Living Weapon that equips for 2 and gives the equipped creature +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment we have in play, giving us a powerful stat boosting equipment that comes into play with its own body and pumps our creatures even further as we create more and more clues. Skipping to the CMC5 slot, we have our last 2 artifacts with Conjurer's Closet and Tamiyo's Journal. Conjurer's Closet simply flickers one of our creatures on our end step, letting us trigger our commander an additional time and taking advantage of any ETB effects we may have in play. Tamiyo's Journal investigates on each of our upkeeps, and we can tap it and sack 3 clues to tutor any card from our deck and put it into our hand, giving us additional clue generation and a repeatable tutoring effect that allows us to search up our win cons with minimal setup. That's it for our artifacts, and since we're not running any planeswalkers in this build, we'll skip right to the land base. Quickly running down our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Yavimaya Coast, which taps for a colorless or either of our colors if we take a damage, Vine Glimmer Snarl, which comes into play tapped unless we reveal an island or forest from our hand when it ETBs and taps for either of our colors, Simic Growth Chamber, which comes into play tapped, bounces one of our lands back to hand and taps for both our colors, Temple of Mastery, which comes into play tapped, scries 1 when it ETBs and taps for either of our colors, Rimewood Falls, which comes into play tapped, taps for either of our colors and counts as both a forest and an island, Myriad Landscape, which taps for colorless, comes into play tapped, and we can pay 2 and sack it to put 2 of the same basic land from our deck into play tapped, and finally Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both which we can tap and sack to put a basic land into play tapped from our deck. For utility lands, we're running Reliquary Tower, Ghost Quarter, and Scavenger Grounds. Reliquary Tower taps for a colorless and removes our maximum hand size, allowing us to use our clues more frequently for draw without the need to fear for discarding down to hand size. Ghost Quarter taps for a colorless and we can tap it and sack it to destroy target land, giving its controller a basic from their deck to replace it, making it a good source of spot removal for our opponent's utility lands. Scavenger Grounds taps for a colorless and we can pay 2 and sack it to exile all cards from all graveyards, providing us with a powerful source of graveyard hate that affects the entire board. Lastly, we're running 12 islands and 12 forests as our basics to fill out our land base. So now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 37 creatures including the commander, 9 instants, 7 sorceries, 5 enchantments, 6 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 19 ETB effects on creatures, 18 cards that care about clues being generated or being on the field, 9 cards that investigate, 8 cards that can bounce our creatures back to hand, and 5 cards that flicker our creatures, giving us a decent number of creatures with ETB triggers that work well alongside our commander to create clue tokens, a decent amount of cards that care about said clues and create more, supported by a fair number of effects that can return creatures back to hand or flicker them on the field for additional value and protection. For general deck stats, we have 14 ramp sources, 11 card draw sources, 12 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes, being a bit light on the wipes, but everything else being in the typical numbers. Looking at our mana curve, we have 7 1-drops, 15 2-drops, 19 3-drops, 14 4-drops, 6 5-drops, 1 6-drop, and 2 7-drops, giving us an early to mid-game curve that allows us to drop our commander early and generate clues aggressively to take advantage of them as the game progresses. Currently, this deck is valued at $64.96, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For some side grades, more creatures that create artifact tokens would be welcome additions. Tireless Provisioner, for example, is a good source of food and treasure generation. Daring Sleuth and its transformation, Bearer of Overwhelming Truths, is a decent repeatable source of clue generation. And finally, Trail of Evidence is another good source of clues provided we have enough instants and sorceries to warrant its inclusion. More creatures that take advantage of clues or artifacts should also be considered. Darksteel Juggernaut, for example, is a hard-to-remove threat that gets massive thanks to our clue generation. Master of Ethereum would be good for the same reason, and also pumps our other artifact creatures to boot. Finally, Masterful Replication allows us to turn all our clues into a copy of target artifact creature we control to perform an alpha strike on our opponents. For upgrades, Tireless Tracker would be a great addition for further clue generation and payoff for sacking clues. Adrix and Nev and Panharmonicon are a potent way to double up our token creation. Deadeye Navigator and Thassa Deep Dwelling are both potent flicker enablers to re-trigger ETB effects turn after turn. And finally, Urza Lord High Artificer not only is a potent flicker target himself, as he creates artifact matter payoffs when he ETBs, but also turns all our clues into mana rocks for an impressive amount of ramp that matches his impressive price tag. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Firstly, I would like to say thank you to all my subs yet again, since as of this video we have cracked the 500 sub milestone and officially have less road in front of us than behind us to get to that coveted 1k sub mark. As always, thanks for supporting the channel, since without your support this channel's growth would not be possible. Moving on to the votes, after another close poll, the next video will be featuring Karth the Lion, as voted by Dorito Dust 007, Johnny Billick, Kesari, One Trick of Fanny, and the Line Guy. That means the next poll lineup will be featuring General Ferris Rockrick, Sithis Harvest Hand, and Piru the Volatile. Let me know in the comments which of these three you'd like to see an upcoming video on. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.